So, of course, the big news in the NBA today is the fact that ESPN has decided to remix the top 50 NBA players of all time list, which was originally put out back in 1996. And much was made of the fact that some players have been removed. Okay. The top 50 players list was created back in 1996. And with very few exceptions, that list has just been seen as the gold standard of great players. And of course, younger basketball fans are going to see the change as sort of a reaffirmation of their belief that the players today are greater than the players of old, since those players were removed. And I mean, I'll say that a lot of it has to do with ESPN manipulation. They know that's the biggest market, those younger, impressionable fans. So they're going to, of course, alter their list to include players that they think are more marketable. Okay? Dolce's is not marketable now. Stephen Curry is. I'm not saying I don't agree with most of the list because, to be honest with you, most of the new players are on my top 50. The new players are included. Ray Allen, he's at the very bottom of my list. Of course, Kobe Bryant's the top 50. I have Kobe as my 15th greatest player of all time. Some people think that's too low. I have my reasons why I have him at 15. I don't have Stephen Curry in my top 50, but I probably will include him after this year. Tim Duncan, of course. I think he's top 10. Kevin Durant's top 40 to me. Garnett's top 20, about roughly top 20. Allen Iverson's top 40 to me. LeBron James top 5. Jason Kidd's the top 40. Reggie Miller's barely in my top 50, but he's there. Steve Nash is in my top 50 near the bottom. Dirk Nowitzki is nearly top 20 to me. Paul Pierce is top 40. And Dwayne Wade is top 30 to me. So, like I said, I don't really have a problem with most of these guys that have been added on to the list since the past 20 years. However, with the guys who, I have to say this too. One thing that I think hasn't been noted, Shaq didn't belong on the top 50 back in 1996. He hadn't done enough. And that's going to go into my old argument, because that was the argument that many prominent sports writers made about Shaq, is that he hadn't done enough yet to be included onto that list. Now, of course, now, nobody would argue with that. Shaq is a top probably 5 all-time center. Had he been more hungry and more dedicated, Shaq probably could have been gone down as the greatest player of all time. That's my argument with Curry. I just think that it's still, I just thought a couple of years ago that it was just too early to be putting him on that breath with, especially the year he had 30 points per game, leading the NBA and scoring and all that. I thought it was just too early, okay? Now we had another season, another championship, 2 MVPs on his belt. Now I can kind of see an argument for putting him top 50. He's played long enough now. I think this is his 10th NBA season. Yeah, I can see it now. After this year, I'm going to probably include him in my top 50. But that's just me. I'm a stickler for longevity. Because I always go with the, what if this guy gets hit by a bus type mentality. Like, what happens if he's just, I don't project. Now, with the guys who were taken out, Nate Archibald, Dave Bing, Dave Cowens, Dave DeBusschere, Clyde Drexler, Sam Jones, Pete Maravich, Robert Parrish, Dolce, Bill Sharman, Wes Unseld, Bill Walton, Lenny Wilkins, James Worthy. Okay, I don't necessarily see a problem with someone taking out Lenny Wilkins and James Worthy. James Worthy, of course, was on the great Showtime Lakers teams. But I've always thought in my mind that James Worthy, especially as the last 20 years have gone past, I thought Worthy was more of a top 70 guy by this time. Same thing for Lenny Wilkins. Bill Walton, if it comes to pure talent, he's one of the greatest centers we've ever seen when he could stay healthy. But you look at his actual career and what he did, there's little argument in my mind that he's not a top 50 player. He just didn't do enough. I think he only scored something like 6,000 points in his career. I mean, when he could actually stay on the court and contribute, he was a great player, but he didn't play long enough. Now, Wes Unseld, one of those tweeners, tremendous rebounder, Wes Unseld, great defensive player, one of the greatest outlet passers we've ever seen at the 5 ever. Ever, if not the greatest. But he wasn't a great offensive player. But I like Wes Unseld. I could kind of relate to him. I'm not. When I play basketball, I'm not a great offensive player either. So, when I could play, or whatever. But I could see someone saying, I thought Wes was more of a top 60-ish guy. Bill Sharman's not top 50 to me. Dolph Schayes is not top 50 to me anymore either. More like top 70 or something. Robert Parrish never, to me, was a top 50 player. Even back then, I didn't think that he belonged on the top 50 list. I thought guys like Artis Gilmore had a better case. And I think it's definitely the case now. Sam Jones, to me, is probably top 50. He's in my top 50, but he's like the bottom. I think Sam Jones is probably one of the top 4 shooting guards or perimeter players. Well, I'll say shooting guards. In the NBA 1960s, Oscar Robertson, Jerry West, then him, Sam Jones, and then Hal Greer. Dave DeBusschere was great. I can see someone saying that he's not top 50. Dave Cowens arguably is a top 50. He's the second greatest rebounding Celtic of all time, in my opinion, behind only Bill Russell. This is a guy who was a prominent stat stuffer for the Celtics, consistently leading his team in both points and rebounds, along with assists and blocks. And I think even steals, sometimes he led the team in that category. So he was just a hell of a basketball player. 1972-73 MVP, I believe, that year. That's the year the Celtics won 68 ball games. I think Tom Heinsohn was the coach of the year, and that team was famously upset, I believe it was in the Eastern Conference Finals, by the eventual champion New York Knicks, who won 60 games themselves that year. But that 68-win Celtic team gets lost in transition. I butchered that one, didn't I? Lost in translation, because of the fact that they failed to win a title. Okay? But of course, Cowens did win a title in 74 and 76. Two-time NBA champion, one-time MVP. Had that team not choked against the Knicks, probably would have won 3 titles. Nate Archibald is one of the greatest point guards of all time. Had injuries not derailed his career, I think he'd been the greatest little man, bar none, of all time. He's still one of the greatest little men. I think he scored 18,000 points in his career. Of course, he won a title in 81 with the Boston Celtics. Oh, man. Injuries kind of ruined him, because he went from being a dominant offensive player to being a very good one, but he lost a lot of his explosiveness. Injuries just just completely ruined his career, but I don't say ruined his career, but it slowed him down a lot. And this is a guy who I think without injuries probably would have been a guy putting up 25,000 points in his career. I can see him maybe not being top 50, but definitely top 60 in my opinion. The one guy who, and of course Dave Bing is in that category as well. The one guy who's not included in top 50, I think, is bullshit. The revised list for ESPN is Clyde Drexler. How in the hell is Clyde Drexler not on this list? Clyde Drexler, in his prime. There's a YouTuber who I'm not going to repeat his name, constantly tries to badmouth Clyde Drexler and talk about how he's not a great player and he's overrated and all this stuff. Clyde Drexler, his last year in the league, okay, Last year in the league, when he was about 37 years old, averaged 18 points a game. All right? 18 points a game. So when he was leaving out of the league, he was still averaging 18 points a game. And that was a diminished Clyde Drexler on the Houston Rockets by the end. Well, he was primarily just a jump shooter, which was reflected by the fact I think his last year he shot only 43%. But in today's NBA, that would actually be kind of decent. But Clyde Drexler, before the knee injury that he suffered, I think in 91-92 season, might have been March or something like that, or 92. Clyde Drexler was a phenomenal player, man. This was a guy who, in his prime, was scoring 25, 26, 27 points a game for the Portland Trail Blazers, 7, maybe close to 8 rebounds a game, 5 to 6, 7 assists a game, giving you 2 steals a game. Great scorer, phenomenal rebounder for his position, especially on the offensive end. He was a tremendous offensive rebounder for his position. I mean, just tremendous. Wasn't a great defensive player, but he got a lot of passing lane steals and things of such nature. But he was an average defender, I would say, but he wasn't bad. And of course, he went to the finals as a peak player in 90 and 92. He happened to just lose to one of the great defensive teams of all time, the Bad Boy Pistons and the Chicago Bulls, 2 great defensive teams. He did ultimately win a title in 95, even though he was kind of second banana to Akeem Olajuwon. That was the last year that we saw Akeem Olajuwon at his full-blown greatness. After that, it was a slow general decline in Olajuwon's performance and skills. But even in that 95 finals when Clyde Drexler was slowed down by injuries, what did he put up? Like 21 points, 9 rebounds, 7 assists. And I want to say it was 2 or 3 steals per game. And this was a guy who was slowed down by that time at age 35, 34. Clyde Drexler is a top, in my opinion, top 30 all-time player, at least. At least. So it's ridiculous and ludicrous he's not on this list. But I'm going to tell you something. The passage of time is a bitch. Okay? The original top 50 list was created in 1996. At that time, only Pete Maravich was deceased. Only Pete Maravich. Young people who don't know this, Pete Maravich died tragically at the age of 40 from a heart condition that was previously undetected. Okay, very young. Now, I'm looking at the list of the older guys. And since then, we've lost Paul Arizin, Will Chamberlain, Dave DeBusschere, Moses Malone, George Mikan, Dolph Schayes, Bill Sherman, and Nate Archibald. And many of these guys who are still alive right now are in their 80s, like a Bill Russell and a Paul Arizin. Excuse me, not Paul Arizin. And a Elgin Baylor and a Bob Pettit. So these guys are getting older, and we don't know how much longer they're going to be around, man. But basically what I'm trying to say is that their generation is leaving, and the memories are getting fuzzy. There's not a lot of tape out there to prove how great these guys were. The people who played with them, teammates, they're not out there. They're affirmed or aged, and many of them are gone now. We don't have Will Chamberlain anymore around to talk about how great that 66-67 team was. That's a team that was voted the greatest team of the first 35 years in the NBA back in 1981 by a panel of sports experts. Now, Nobody even remembers that 67-76ers team. That's what happens with time. That's what happens when you don't have video footage to show in this highlight reel world how great you were as a team. You know, you don't have only the word of mouth. You had to have highlight reels. You had evidence to prove it. Dead men tell no tales. Several of the players on that team are now gone. So you have to wonder, you know, what's going to happen in the next 20 years. Which of the older players are going to be removed then? And nobody's there to argue their case. And that's one of the sad things about growing older, man. You know, people don't respect what you did. But tell me what you guys think about the new ESPN remixed top 50 list.